The late afternoon air around Lake Union carried that familiar Seattle dampness, soft, cool, and clinging gently to the skin. Guests moved in pairs and small groups toward the entrance of the waterfront venue, the low hum of conversation blending with the subtle lap of water against the docks. Under delicate string lights, already flickering on despite the daylight, Naomi Bennett stood beside Andrew, adjusting the thin strap of her dress as she tried to steady the excitement and nerves running through her. Andrew seemed wound a little too tight. He kept checking his watch, shifting his weight, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. Naomi reached for his arm, hoping to calm him with a simple touch, but he barely reacted. His jaw was set, his eyes unfocused, as though he were having an entire argument inside his own head. "Hey," she whispered, offering a small smile. "We're okay. It's just nerves." But instead of softening, he exhaled sharply through his nose. "It's just my mom keeps saying people might talk," he muttered, his voice low but not low enough. "About your past, your background." Naomi froze. "My background?" Andrew winced, realizing the words had escaped too quickly. But instead of taking them back, he stumbled forward, making it worse. "I mean the foster care stuff. People judge, Naomi. They just do. I wish," his voice faltered, "I wish it wasn't part of the picture today." A few guests nearby stopped mid-conversation. A bridesmaid glanced over her shoulder. A cousin of Andrew's raised his brows in a way that said he absolutely heard every word. The shift was instant, a quiet, sharp pause in the air. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. Andrew's face went stiff. "Let's just forget it," he murmured quickly, already turning toward the doors, as if walking fast enough could erase what he'd said. But the damage had already landed. Naomi felt the damp Seattle breeze cut a little colder against her skin. She held her posture steady, lifting her chin just slightly instinct. Habit, survival. Years in foster care had taught her how to hold herself together when the ground beneath her suddenly cracked. She'd learned how to keep a still face when someone made her feel like she didn't belong. How to stand quietly while people whispered judgments they assumed she couldn't hear. But even with all that practice, Andrew's words struck deeper than she expected. They came from the person she trusted most. On the very day she was supposed to feel chosen, supported, loved, a memory flashed unbidden. Sitting in a social worker's office at 13, hands clasped in her lap as two adults discussed her like a file instead of a child. Another memory layered over it, a foster mother shaking her head, telling her not to bring attention to herself so people wouldn't judge, so people wouldn't talk. And here she was again years later, hearing the same quiet rejection wrapped in concern. The guests resumed their conversations, though their glances lingered a moment too long. Naomi inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. Still, beneath the surface, something subtle but unmistakable loosened. The first small thread of doubt pulling gently at the edges of her perfect day. Just as the unsettled silence around the entrance began to thin, the sound of a powerful engine rolled softly down the driveway. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. A long white limousine, polished to a mirror shine, glided up to the curb with a kind of effortless elegance that didn't just arrive, but announced itself. It was the kind of car that didn't belong to anyone in the Collins family. Everyone knew that immediately. The chauffeur stepped out, tall and composed in a black suit and cap. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward Naomi, stopping just a respectful distance away. His voice was calm, professional. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Naomi Bennett?" A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Someone whispered, "Who sent the limo?" Another leaned in closer, eyes widening with speculation. Naomi blinked, momentarily forgetting how to respond. "Yes, I'm Naomi." The chauffeur offered a courteous nod and stepped aside, revealing a second man emerging from the limousine. He was in his mid-50s, sharp suit, polished shoes, and the quiet confidence of someone used to walking into boardrooms and being listened to. He approached with a warm, reserved smile. "Miss Bennet, good afternoon. My name is Richard Lawson. I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore." The whispering intensified, spreading like a small electrical buzz among the guests. Victoria Collins, Andrew's mother, was the first to speak aloud. Her tone was wrapped in polite surprise, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. "Mrs. Whitmore? That Whitmore." She let out a thin, performative laugh. "My goodness, Naomi, you certainly keep interesting company. Who would have thought?" Harold Collins, standing beside her, gave Naomi a slow, searching look. Not hostile, but full of calculation, like he was trying to rearrange everything he thought he knew about her. Andrew stepped forward, discomfort flickering across his face. "There must be a mistake. We didn't request a limo." Richard maintained his professional composure. This was a personal request from Mrs. Whitmore. She insisted that Miss Bennet be provided transportation befitting the significance of the day. Naomi stared at him, her heartbeat suddenly loud in her ears. I don't know her," she said carefully. "I've never met anyone named Eleanor Whitmore." Richard smiled gently, as if he expected that answer. "She anticipated you might say that. But I assure you, Miss Bennet, the instructions were very clear." Victoria crossed her arms, eyes narrowing with intrigue. "Well, isn't that something?" she said. The sweetness of her tone strained. A limousine from a distinguished benefactor, for Naomi. Another sting, another reminder that she didn't belong in the world Andrew's parents imagined for their family. Guests were openly watching now, some pretending not to stare, while failing miserably. Naomi felt every pair of eyes on her, weighing her, adding up mysteries she herself didn't understand. Andrew shifted beside her, jaw tightening. "Let's just get inside," he muttered, clearly wanting the situation to disappear. But it wouldn't. Not the limousine. Not the name Eleanor Whitmore. And not the sudden, unsettling feeling that something much bigger than a wedding surprise was unfolding around her. Naomi stood frozen for a moment, confusion curling tight in her chest. She had no idea who Eleanor Whitmore was, but the woman clearly knew her. The moment they stepped inside the venue, the noise of the outside world softened, but the unease did not. Guests followed in a slow stream toward the civil signing room, their footsteps echoing lightly against the polished floors. Even in the quiet hallway, Naomi could feel the tension pressing in from every angle, soft whispers drifting behind her, curious glances lingering a bit too long before darting away. It wasn't the usual wedding day excitement. It was scrutiny. She could almost hear the questions in their eyes. Who is Eleanor Whitmore? Why send a limousine? Why Naomi? Andrew walked slightly ahead of her, keeping his posture straight and his gestures practiced, as if performing normalcy might make it real. But he didn't look at her, not fully. Each time she tried to catch his gaze, he found something else to focus on. A decoration on the wall, a relative waving at him, the floor beneath his feet. Anything but her. Inside the civil signing room, warm, natural light filtered through large windows overlooking the lake. A table stood at the center, simple, elegant, set with 2 pens and the official documents they needed to sign. A small floral arrangement added a touch of softness to the space, though Naomi barely registered it. Her pulse thudded steadily in her ears. Guests found seats along the wall, their murmurs dipping into hushed curiosity. Naomi caught fragments as they settled in. Didn't know she had wealthy contacts. Maybe she's connected to someone big? Strange that no one mentioned it before. Each murmur tightened the knot in her stomach. The limousine had turned her into a puzzle no one, including herself, could solve. The officiant stepped forward with a bright, welcoming smile. "Congratulations to both of you. When you're ready, we'll begin." Andrew nodded eagerly, maybe too eagerly. Naomi forced herself to breathe. They approached the table together. Andrew stood tall beside her, hands clasped behind his back, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the stiffness in his shoulders. Whatever he was feeling, embarrassment, confusion, frustration, he was hiding it beneath layers of forced composure. "Bride first," the officiant said gently. Naomi stepped forward, fingers trembling just slightly as she picked up the pen. She wrote her name, Naomi Bennett, slow, precise strokes. The steady motion grounded her for a moment. This was still her wedding day. This was still supposed to mean something. Then Andrew took the pen. He signed quickly, barely pausing. His handwriting looked rushed, almost impatient. The officiant looked between them with a warm smile. "Congratulations. With this, your marriage is legally recognized." Polite applause rose from the guests, brief, obligatory. Naomi smiled because she was supposed to. Andrew smiled because he had to. But the air between them felt hollow. As the guests stood to move toward the next part of the celebration, Naomi felt it with clarity. The emotional distance had already begun to form, quiet and subtle, like a thin veil settling between their joined lives. After the civil signing, the coordinator ushered everyone back outside for photos. The air had grown cooler, carrying that faint Seattle mist that settled lightly on hair and shoulders, but never quite turned into rain. The photographer seemed almost energized by it, clapping her hands as she positioned the newlyweds near the white limousine. "Perfect light," she said brightly. "Stay close. Tilt your chin a little. Yes, right there." Naomi leaned into Andrew, and for a moment the world shrank to the click of the camera shutter. Kisses on the cheek, hands briefly intertwined, the brush of shoulders, soft glances that looked effortless through a lens. On camera, they were picture-perfect, radiant, synchronized, almost cinematic. Even Naomi felt the illusion pulling her in for several seconds. But illusions didn't last long today. When the photographer paused to check her shots, Jessica stepped quickly to Naomi's side, looping her arm around her waist with her characteristic protective energy. "Okay," Jessica whispered, eyes sharp. "We're not pretending anymore. Who is Eleanor Whitmore?" Naomi forced a small, breathy laugh. "I'm telling you the truth, I don't know." Jessica blinked. "You don't know the woman who sent you a limousine? A white limousine." Then, leaning closer, "The Collins family looks like they're about to hire a private investigator." Naomi didn't have to look to know Jessica was right. The buzz around them carried a strangely charged energy, not excitement, but curiosity edged with suspicion. The photographer called for group shots, and guests shuffled into place. As Naomi moved toward the center, Victoria Collins approached with her refined smile, the kind that managed to feel both polite and insincere at once. "What an interesting turn of events," Victoria murmured, her eyes flicking deliberately toward the limousine. "I suppose every wedding has its surprises." She let out a soft, practiced laugh, though some surprises are more unexpected than others. Her gaze slid back to Naomi, lingering just long enough to imply everything she didn't say out loud. Harold Collins stood a few steps behind her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But his silence was heavy, less mocking than Victoria's, more analytical, as if he were carefully re-evaluating Naomi's entire presence in their family. Andrew shifted uncomfortably beside Naomi, adjusting his tie for the third time. "Mom, please," he muttered, trying to rein in the situation. Victoria didn't budge. "I'm simply making an observation. After all, we do like to know the people joining our family." Another pointed remark. Another sting, cloaked in etiquette. The photographer lifted her camera again. "Everyone smile." They smiled. Cameras flashed. But beneath the polished image, the elegant dress, Andrew's suit, the glittering limousine in the background, Naomi felt something else pulsing beneath the surface. pressure, subtle but relentless, growing with each glance, each whisper, each sideways question. As the next round of photos began, Naomi understood something clearly. Today wasn't just a celebration. It was a test, one she hadn't expected, and wasn't sure she was prepared to face. The reception hall along Lake Union shimmered softly as Naomi and Andrew stepped inside. Warm light from crystal chandeliers cascaded across the room, casting delicate reflections on the polished floor. The space was elegant in an understated, carefully curated way. White linen, soft gold accents, eucalyptus woven into centerpieces, candles flickering gently at each table. At the far end of the room stood a towering wedding cake, its 3 tiers decorated with intricate sugar flowers that looked almost real. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of atmosphere Naomi had once dreamed of. Guests were already making their way toward their assigned tables, guided by the coordinator and 2 assistants dressed in dark navy. Family members clustered near the front, friends filled in tables along the sides, and co-workers, mostly Andrews, took seats closer to the windows overlooking the lake. Conversation floated through the room, light and expectant, but Naomi could still sense the undercurrent beneath it. The limousine had become a quiet thread weaving through nearly every whispered exchange. Andrew pulled out Naomi's chair at the sweetheart table placed on a small raised platform. She smiled at him, soft, unsure, and he returned the gesture, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. They sat close, yet Naomi felt a faint, expanding distance between them, like a small drift of air that hadn't been there days ago. Across the room, Victoria and Harold took their seats at the family table, both offering polite nods toward the couple. Harold's expression was thoughtful, calculating, while Victoria's was a mixture of performed enthusiasm and something sharper beneath it. Naomi tried to look away before the tension could settle any deeper into her chest. Event staff hurried around the space, making final adjustments before the program began. One fixed the angle of a spotlight. Another checked the sound system. The band tuned their instruments softly near the back. The MC tested the microphone. A gentle tap, a low hum, then a crisp, "Good evening, everyone." Naomi watched the room bustle around her, trying to anchor herself in the moment. She traced a finger along the edge of her champagne glass, took in the candlelit glow, the elegant floral arrangements, the small details she had once cared so much about during planning. She knew she should feel joy. This was her wedding night, her celebration, her beginning. But something felt slightly off. Not wrong exactly, just shifted, like the room had changed a fraction of an inch, tilting the world in a way only she could sense. Maybe it was Andrew's earlier comment, echoing faintly at the back of her mind. Maybe it was the limousine. Maybe it was the way Victoria's eyes followed her, as if waiting for another unexpected twist. The MC raised his voice, cheerful and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, if everyone can settle into their seats, we're ready to begin tonight's celebration." Guests clapped lightly, the room settling into anticipation. Naomi breathed in slowly. The night stretched ahead, beautiful, glittering, full of possibility, but she couldn't shake the sense that beneath all the sparkle, something unseen was quietly unfolding, something she wasn't prepared for. The first gentle tap of the microphone cut through the murmur of the room. "Good evening, everyone," the MC announced, his voice warm and polished. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate the union of Andrew and Naomi, 2 people who remind us that love finds its way, even in the most unexpected moments. Please join me in welcoming our newlyweds." Applause rose across the hall, echoing beneath the chandeliers. Naomi smiled automatically, lifting her glass slightly in acknowledgement. She felt the weight of every eye on her, and Andrew, smiling, assessing, waiting to see what kind of couple they were. Andrew's smile looked perfect from a distance. Up close, Naomi could see how tightly he held it in place. The MC gestured toward the family table. To begin our celebration, we'd love to hear a few words from those who know the couple best. Let's start with the parents of the groom. A few guests clapped as Harold Collins stood, lifting his glass. His speech was calm, traditional. He spoke about marriage as a partnership, about building a home together, about hoping the couple would learn to understand each other in all circumstances. It was polite, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that the last line carried a subtle undertone she wasn't meant to miss. Next came a friend of Andrew's from college, who offered a light-hearted toast about late-night study sessions and how Andrew had always been ambitious, determined, and ready for a future that matched his potential. The room chuckled. Naomi smiled again. But somewhere in the praise was a faint implication, an expectation, about the kind of life Andrew was meant to have. Then came Victoria. She rose with slow grace, smoothing an invisible crease in her silk dress before lifting her champagne flute. Her smile was poised, eyes bright with the sort of practiced warmth that never reached her voice. "Well," she began, "I must say this day has been full of surprises." A few guests exchanged knowing glances. But surprises remind us of life's unpredictability, don't they? We never truly know what awaits us, or who may suddenly appear. Naomi felt her chest tighten. Victoria continued, tone soft but laced with meaning. Andrew has always been a man of great promise. From a young age, he carried himself with a kind of focus and discipline that assured us he'd build a future worthy of his upbringing. And now, with Naomi by his side, we trust that, in time, everything will fall into place. The pause after, in time, lingered just a little too long. Polite laughter drifted across the tables. But Naomi heard the message clearly. "You are an uncertainty we never anticipated." As Victoria took her seat, Naomi caught Andrew's expression. He stared at the tablecloth, shoulders slightly tense, avoiding her eyes again. Whatever apology he had whispered on the dance floor earlier had evaporated. The distance between them stretched like a quiet fault line. Toast after toast followed, friendly, kind on the surface, but Naomi felt increasingly detached, as though she were sitting behind a pane of glass, watching her own wedding from the outside. Guests clapped, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell in waves, but none of it touched her. She sat beside her new husband, surrounded by friends, family, and celebration, and yet for the first time that night she felt profoundly alone. The lights dimmed just slightly as the band shifted into place. A soft melody drifted across the room. Gentle piano, warm strings, the kind of romantic music chosen to melt tension, not expose it. The MC's voice rose over the speakers. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join us in celebrating the couple's first dance." Guests clapped politely as Andrew stood and offered his hand to Naomi. She took it, though the movement felt tentative, more ritual than instinct. Together, they stepped onto the dance floor, bathed in the quiet glow of the overhead chandeliers. The moment the music swelled, Andrew placed a hand on Naomi's waist, pulling her just close enough to fit the picture everyone expected to see. They began to sway, slow and synchronized, the kind of dance meant to symbolize unity. But Naomi could feel the tension in his shoulders. He kept his eyes on a spot over her shoulder for the first few seconds, his breath uneven, as though searching for the right words before he dared meet her gaze. Eventually, he leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry about earlier." Naomi inhaled, waiting for something more, for clarity, for remorse, for an explanation that would anchor the apology in something real. Instead, Andrew exhaled shakily, eyes flickering away again. I was nervous," he muttered. "Everything's happening so fast. I didn't mean to make you feel bad." It was the kind of apology made in passing, soft, vague, incomplete. Enough to acknowledge the surface of the hurt, but not deep enough to reach its root. Naomi swallowed the ache rising in her chest. "It's okay," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Around them, guests watched with warm smiles, phones raised to capture the moment. The scene looked perfect from the outside. Two newlyweds gliding gracefully across the floor, her hand resting lightly against his shoulder, his fingers brushing the small of her back. They turned slowly beneath the lights, their silhouettes momentarily merging into a single elegant outline. But Naomi felt the fracture running beneath the beauty. Andrew's grip tightened occasionally, not in affection, but in tension. Each time the limousine or his mother's remarks flashed through his mind, Naomi could sense him withdrawing inward, even as they danced inches apart. His apology floated between them like a thin veil, not enough to bridge the gap, not enough to tear it open either. The chorus lifted, the dance slowed, and for a few brief seconds they rested their foreheads nearly together, as though the moment might heal what had been bruised. But the connection didn't fully land. When the music faded and the guests applauded, Naomi stepped back with a practiced smile, feeling the weight of eyes and expectations settle again. It was a beautiful dance, soft, elegant, dreamlike, and yet, beneath every step, something quiet and fragile had already begun to crack. The moment the first dance ended and the band eased into a livelier rhythm, guests began to drift from their tables, toward the bar, toward the dessert display, toward each other. The atmosphere lightened, but the undercurrent Naomi had been feeling all evening only seemed to sharpen. Everywhere she turned, conversations seemed to hush when she approached, then resume the moment she stepped away. She didn't need to hear full sentences to know what they were about. The limousine had become the center of gravity in the room. Near the bar, two of Andrew's former co-workers stood with glasses of wine, speaking in lowered voices. "I'm telling you, nobody sends a car like that for no reason." "So what? She's secretly rich." Or connected. Someone with that kind of power doesn't just appear out of nowhere. At a nearby table, a woman leaned toward her husband, her tone sharp with curiosity. "Eleanor Whitmore. Isn't that the family that owns half the waterfront development projects?" The husband nodded slowly. "Old money. Generational. If that woman sent a limo, she must know the bride personally." "But Naomi never mentioned anyone like that," the woman pressed. "Which is odd, don't you think?" Odd. Suspicious. Unlikely. Naomi could almost hear the unspoken adjectives. She walked past another small group, distant relatives of Andrew's, just in time to catch a fragment. If she really had those kinds of connections, why didn't she say something? Maybe she's playing it humble. Or maybe she's not who we think she is. The word snagged at Naomi like small thorns. Jessica tried to keep things light, staying close to her side whenever she could. At one point, she leaned over and whispered, "Ignore them. Half these people are bored and need something to talk about." But Naomi wasn't sure she could ignore it. Not when each passing remark seemed to peel away another layer of the fragile confidence she'd built for herself. She had fought her whole life not to be defined by her past. Yet here she was again, reduced to speculation, rumor, suspicion because of one mysterious limousine tied to a woman she didn't even know. The class divide pressed in sharply, painfully. Andrew came from a world filled with stability, lineage, expectations. Naomi came from a world where last names changed with every foster placement and nothing stayed the same for long. She had spent years learning how to stand firmly in both worlds, but tonight made her feel as though she were balancing on the thinnest edge between them. At one point, near the dessert table, she overheard a particularly cutting whisper. Maybe that's why Andrew married her. If she has someone powerful backing her, her breath caught. She stepped away before hearing the rest, feeling the room tilt again beneath her feet. The chandeliers glowed warmly overhead. The music played. Laughter rose and fell. But Naomi felt none of it. Instead, she felt the younger version of herself. The girl sitting quietly in a foster home, listening to adults decide who she was without ever knowing her. Tonight felt exactly like that. Only now, the room was filled with crystal glasses and evening dresses, and she was supposed to smile through it as the evening wore on. The energy inside the reception hall softened into a warm, tired glow. Guests began gathering their coats, finishing the last of their champagne and offering parting hugs. The band shifted into quieter melodies, and the staff started to clear empty glasses from tables. Naomi smiled through each goodbye, accepting congratulations that felt both kind and strangely distant. "You two looked beautiful tonight," someone said. "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness," said another. "You must be exhausted. Enjoy your first night as a married couple." Naomi nodded, hugged, thanked, and smiled until her cheeks ached. She could feel the kindness in the words, but beneath it all lingered the lingering buzz of curiosity that had hummed through the evening. Even now, some guests seemed to cast one last glance toward the entrance, maybe hoping to see the limousine again, maybe still wondering who Eleanor Whitmore was. As if on cue, Richard Lawson appeared near the doorway, composed as ever. His presence alone seemed to reignite the murmurs. He approached with a polite nod toward the couple. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins," he said smoothly. "Your car is ready whenever you are." Andrew stiffened. Naomi caught the subtle clench of his jaw. He forced a tight smile in return. "Thank you," he said, though his voice lacked warmth. Richard didn't seem bothered. "Mrs. Whitmore sends her heartfelt congratulations and wishes the two of you a peaceful evening," he added. Naomi felt a flutter of confusion again, mixed with something she couldn't name. Gratitude? Curiosity? Unease? Andrew simply nodded. "We appreciate it." Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of the lake. The limousine's interior glowed softly. Its open door, like an invitation, wrapped in luxury Naomi had never imagined she'd step into on her wedding night. Andrew placed a hand at the small of her back as they slid inside. Gentle, familiar, but not entirely present. The door shut with a muted thump, sealing them in from the world. Inside, the car was quiet, almost too quiet. Naomi smoothed the skirt of her dress, her gaze catching Andrew's reflection in the tinted window. He sat with his hands clasped, posture stiff, eyes fixed ahead. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Just a long day." She wanted to believe that, wanted to pretend the distance between them was simply exhaustion. She reached for his hand, and after a small hesitation, he took hers. His fingers felt warm, familiar, but the connection didn't settle the way it usually did. Something remained unspoken in the space between their palms, in the shallow breath he let out, in the tension lining his shoulders. The limousine pulled up to their Fremont apartment, lights glowing softly from the street lamps. As they stepped out, Naomi held onto Andrew's arm, trying to anchor the moment. "This is our first night," she reminded herself. "This is supposed to matter." Andrew unlocked the door, letting her step inside first. Naomi glanced around their home. Cozy, warm, the place they'd built together. But as Andrew set his jacket down and offered a tired smile, she felt it again, the quiet, emotional distance that had threaded itself through the day, faint but unmistakable. She tightened her grip on his hand. She wasn't ready to let the day end that way. Naomi woke the next morning with the soft gray Seattle light spilling across the room, painting everything in muted tones. For a moment, she lay still, letting the quiet settle around her. It should have felt peaceful, her first morning as a married woman, the first page of a new chapter. But the unease from the night before clung to her like fine mist, impossible to shake off. Andrew was already awake. sitting at the edge of the bed with his back turned. His shoulders rose and fell slowly as if he were deep in thought. When Naomi reached out and touched his arm, he flinched slightly before catching himself. "Oh, hey. Morning," he said, forcing a small smile. She studied him. "Did you sleep okay?" "Yeah, just have a lot on my mind." He stood quickly, avoiding her eyes. "I'll make coffee." The preoccupation in his voice scraped at something inside her. Andrew had always been direct, open, never the type to hide behind vague answers. But today, everything about him felt guarded. As Naomi got dressed, she replayed the moments from yesterday, the insult on the steps, the limousine, the whispers, the toasts. The distance in Andrew's eyes during their first dance. The way he stiffened whenever Eleanor Whitmore's name was mentioned. By the time she stepped into the kitchen, coffee scent filling the air, Andrew was on his phone. He ended the call quickly when he saw her. "Who was that?" she asked gently. "No one. Just work stuff." His answer came too fast, too flat. She didn't push. Not yet. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, Andrew didn't answer. It was his mother's name on the screen. After a long exhale, he handed the phone to Naomi. "She wants to talk to you." Naomi hesitated, then pressed the phone to her ear. "Hi, Victoria." Victoria's voice flowed through the line, sweet but edged with intention. "Naomi, dear, I just wanted to check in after yesterday. The wedding was lovely, wasn't it?" "It was," Naomi replied cautiously. "Well," Victoria continued, voice dropping into a tone meant to sound casual, "I couldn't help but wonder, how long have you known Mrs. Whitmore?" Naomi gripped the counter. "I don't know her." A beat of silence, the skeptical kind. "Oh, really?" Victoria hummed. "Because people like Eleanor don't usually involve themselves without a reason. It made Harold and me wonder if there's something we weren't told." Naomi swallowed. "There's nothing to tell." Another pause. "Well, secrets have a way of coming out. Just remember that." Before Naomi could respond, the call ended. She stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Andrew rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her gaze again. "She thinks there's more going on," Naomi said quietly. Andrew didn't deny it. "People are confused, okay? It was a weird situation. But you're acting like there's more going on." He exhaled, pacing a few steps. I don't know what to think right now." The words hit harder than he seemed to realize. Naomi felt something tighten in her chest, not anger, not fear. Something more complicated. A warning. A shift. The honeymoon glow they should have been living in wasn't there. Instead, their marriage seemed to be beginning under a quiet, growing tension, one neither of them knew how to name yet. Naomi was rinsing breakfast dishes when her phone buzzed on the counter. She dried her hands, expecting it to be Jessica or maybe a coworker checking in after the wedding. But the name on the screen made her freeze. Richard Lawson. Her breath hitched. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." "Good morning, Miss Bennett," Richard said, his voice as composed as ever. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No, it's fine," she replied, though her pulse had quickened. "Is everything okay?" Richard paused, as though choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore has requested a private meeting with you. At your convenience, of course." Naomi gripped the edge of the counter. "With me? Why?" "She feels it would be better discussed in person," Richard said gently. "She asked me to reach out and arrange a time." Confusion washed over Naomi, heavy and disorienting. She had barely slept, her mind still tangled from Victoria's veiled interrogation and Andrew's distant behavior. Now this, another step deeper into a mystery she hadn't asked to be part of. Before she could respond, Andrew walked into the kitchen, mug in hand. He mouthed, "Who is it?" Naomi hesitated, then answered softly, "It's Richard." Andrew's expression tightened immediately. Richard continued on the line, unaware of the tension thickening in the room. Mrs. Whitmore is free this afternoon or tomorrow morning, whichever works best for you. Naomi exhaled slowly. Can I call you back in a few minutes? Of course. Take your time, Miss Bennet. She hung up. Andrew set his mug down with a sharper clink than necessary. Why is he calling you? He said Eleanor Whitmore wants to meet me. Andrew blinked, then scoffed. Why, you don't even know her. I know, Naomi said, voice low. I told him that. Andrew paced a small circle around the kitchen island. This doesn't make sense. She shows up out of nowhere, sends a limousine, interrupts our wedding day, and now she wants a private meeting. He shook his head. It's weird. I agree, but don't you want to know why? He didn't answer. His jaw tensed, his shoulders rising as though holding something back. Andrew, are you upset? I'm not upset, he said too quickly. He stopped, searching for a neutral expression and not finding one. It feels like she's inserting herself into our marriage, into our life. Naomi hesitated. Maybe she knew my mother. Maybe it's something from the past. That's what scares me, Andrew muttered under his breath, but loud enough that she heard it. Jealousy flickered in his expression. Not romantic jealousy, but something tangled in pride and insecurity. The feeling that another person, especially someone powerful, had access to a part of Naomi he didn't understand. Naomi stepped closer. What do you want me to do? Andrew didn't look at her. I don't know. For the first time since the wedding, Naomi felt a strange clarity. This meeting wasn't optional. It was a turning point, one she needed to walk toward. Even if she was afraid of what waited on the other side. She picked up her phone. I'm going, she said quietly. I need answers. And though Andrew didn't argue, the tension in his silence said everything he didn't. The cafe sat tucked beneath a canopy of late summer trees in Queen, and its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Naomi stood outside for a long moment before entering, her hand resting on the door handle as she gathered her breath. She felt exposed, unsteady, caught between fear and a strange pull she didn't fully understand. Curiosity mixed with caution, hope tangled with dread. When she finally stepped inside, the soft clink of porcelain cups and low hum of conversation greeted her. The air smelled of cinnamon and freshly ground coffee. It was calm, intimate, far removed from the tension of the wedding and the silent pressure simmering in her apartment. At a corner table near the window sat a woman with snow-white hair, neatly styled, wearing a charcoal gray coat with a silk scarf draped elegantly around her neck. She looked up the moment Naomi approached. Her eyes, pale blue and strikingly gentle, warmed with recognition Naomi didn't understand. Naomi, she said softly, rising to her feet with surprising grace. Thank you for coming. Naomi nodded, her voice momentarily stuck. Mrs. Whitmore? Please, the woman said, reaching out to lightly touch Naomi's forearm. Call me Eleanor. Her touch was warm, unexpectedly warm. They sat. For several seconds, Eleanor simply studied Naomi, her gaze kind but searching, as though she were memorizing every detail of Naomi's face. You look so much like her, Eleanor murmured. Naomi's breath hitched. Like who? There was a pause, long enough to make Naomi's pulse pick up. Then Eleanor folded her hands neatly in her lap. Your mother. The world around them seemed to soften, the cafe noises fading into a gentle blur. You knew my mother? Naomi whispered. Eleanor nodded slowly. Many years ago, when she was younger than you are now, I cared for her very much. I tried to help her when she needed support. Her voice trembled ever so slightly, revealing an emotion she was trying to contain. Life, it doesn't always give us second chances, but sometimes, if we're lucky, it gives us a chance to try again with the people left behind. Naomi's heart pounded. Why didn't she ever mention you? Eleanor looked away toward the window, as though searching for a memory outside. Some stories are heavier than people realize. Some connections bring pain along with comfort. She inhaled, steadying herself. Your mother was proud, Naomi, and hurting. I respected her boundaries, even when I wished she'd let me do more. Naomi swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. Her palms cold against the warm porcelain cup the waiter set down in front of her. What does this have to do with me? She asked. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, running her fingers gently over its surface before setting it aside. She didn't push it toward Naomi. She simply let it rest between them. There are things you should know, she said, but I need to confirm a few details first. I won't tell you half-truths, and I won't tell you anything until I am absolutely certain. Her eyes softened. You deserve clarity, not confusion. Naomi nodded, though her chest ached with the weight of unanswered questions. Is it bad? Whatever it is. Eleanor gave her a sad, almost tender smile. It's complicated, but not bad. Never bad. You were never anything to be ashamed of, Naomi. A lump formed in Naomi's throat. She looked down, blinking away the unexpected sting of tears. Will you tell me everything? She whispered. When the time is right, Eleanor replied. And soon. The conversation lingered for several more minutes, gentle, cautious, full of emotional terrain neither woman was fully ready to cross. Then, with a final squeeze of Naomi's hand, Eleanor stood. I'm glad you came, she said. More glad than you know. Naomi watched her leave, the bell above the cafe door chiming softly in her wake. Outside, the Seattle sky had brightened, the soft sunlight filtering through drifting clouds. Naomi stepped onto the sidewalk, the warmth brushing against her skin like a quiet promise. She felt shaken. She felt uncertain. She felt something like hope blooming beneath the fear. And though she didn't yet know who Eleanor truly was, or what story she carried, Naomi sensed her life had shifted in a way she couldn't undo. The ending wasn't clear. The answers weren't here yet. But as she stood in that soft Seattle light, the world around her seemed to open, mysterious, inviting, and full of possibilities still waiting to be revealed.